In July, signs appeared that Northern Cyprus is being prepared for a completely different future than you and I had thought. What are these signs? Firstly, an agreement has been signed to lay a gas pipeline from Turkey to Northern Cyprus. And at the same time, the Secretary-General of the United Nations, António Guterres, visited Northern Cyprus. And Turkey has even proposed completely renaming our country, and this proposal has reached Parliament. So what is actually happening? Is Northern Cyprus becoming more integrated with Turkey, or on the contrary, is its political future moving in a completely different direction? Today, I won't just give you a summary of the news from July, I will try to read between the lines. If you are subscribed to my channel, then you know that I'm pretty good at that. And at the end of the video, I will tell you which event I consider the most important. And it's not at all what was talked about most in the news throughout the month. When I told you in the previous news episode that Cyprus absolutely does not need this gas pipeline, I explained in great detail that no one here is going to use it. And back then I made some very bold assumptions that in reality this is not a gas pipeline from Turkey to Cyprus, but rather that this pipe is being laid to export Cypriot gas, which will be extracted here on the Cyprus shelf in the opposite direction to Turkey and further on to European Union countries. That was a very bold statement and I was criticized for it at the time. Well, it's been probably a little over a month since the previous news report, and the authorities have officially admitted that indeed the pipeline, well, they put it carefully, will operate in both directions. Gas can flow to Cyprus, and it can also flow from Cyprus to Turkey. And on July 10th, as the news told us, a memorandum was signed for a gas pipeline project from the Anamur district to the Technici power plant near Kyrenia. And the government of Northern Cyprus called it one of the largest energy projects of the last century. Do you know what our wonderful neighbors, the Greek Cypriots, did? They lodged a protest. It's just amazing. It's like you or I buying a car and the neighbors lodging a protest. What is that? We won't have such a new car, but you will. Or if you buy real estate and your neighbors protest because you'll be living better than them. That's the same kind of protest the Greek Cypriots expressed. They believe that no, we don't need a cheaper, more environmentally friendly energy source here in Northern Cyprus, because they also perfectly understand that this pipeline is intended to strengthen the position of Turkey and Northern Cyprus, because the European Union really needs this gas to replace Russian gas. And now the pipeline is already being laid, and there will simply be no other way to deliver this gas to the European Union countries in the fastest and cheapest way. At the end of July, the Secretary-General of the United Nations arrived in Cyprus to resolve the Cyprus issue. He hadn't been here for a long time and hadn't really pushed this Cyprus issue to get it resolved. And then suddenly, right at the end of July, after the memorandum on building the gas pipeline was signed, he arrives in Cyprus and tries to urgently bring together the presidents of the two sides to resolve everything. And the president of Northern Cyprus says, okay, we are ready to participate in negotiations, but not negotiations for the sake of negotiations. We need a concrete result. Do you sense the conflict? On one hand, the gas pipeline is binding Northern Cyprus ever more closely to Turkey. But this is gas, this is energy security, this is no joke. On the other hand, the UN Secretary-General arrives and says, we need to urgently resolve the Cyprus issue. Why does it need to be resolved? Because without resolving the Cyprus issue, it won't be possible to export gas from the Northern Cyprus shelf to the European Union. That is why he was sent here, to quickly resolve this issue. But under the United Nations Charter, they cannot recognize Northern Cyprus as an independent state. They have to resolve this somehow within the framework of a federation. But at the same time, Turkey says that, well, that's it, the time has passed. There are de facto two independent countries, Southern Cyprus, Northern Cyprus, so there can be no talk of any federation anymore. It is within these contradictions that the fate of our beautiful island is currently being decided. By the way, if you are interested in Cyprus news, you can see that the Greek Cypriots are trying their best to attack Northern Cyprus, specifically the Northern Cyprus real estate market, because they simply have no other arguments to try and pull the blanket over to their side and finally resolve the Cyprus issue in the way they want. Therefore, any kind of provocation in the Northern Cyprus real estate market is possible right now. But this won't last long. It will only last until this issue is resolved and natural gas exports begin. At the same time, the Politis newspaper stated that the United Nations intends to present us with a new draft for settling the Cyprus issue. Under this draft, one way or another, Northern and Southern Cyprus would become legal countries, legal republics, either within the framework of a single country or as two separate states. Northern Cyprus gets everything it wants: direct flights, international recognition one way or another, and international trade. In return, the United Nations proposes that Northern Cyprus cede several territories to Southern Cyprus as compensation. These are fertile lands from the Guzeliot-Nicosia-Famagusta road towards the southern part. And agriculture is very important because the population is becoming larger and larger, and it is better to also have food security so as not to depend on food imports. Secondly, to give Guzeliot to the Greek Cypriots, and thirdly, Varosha, which is called Marash in Turkish, to also give this entire area to the Greek Cypriots. It seems like they have a plan like this. Of course, both sides. Both the Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots say that no, this plan doesn't really suit us very well. But in reality, the plan is quite reasonable. And it was precisely about this that back in 2004, one of the previous Secretaries-General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, proposed and developed a plan. And the Turkish Cypriots said yes back then. And indeed, in the center of the island between Nicosia and Kyrenia, entire cities have been built with the expectation that the residents of Guzeliot would move here after Guzeliot is handed over to the authorities of southern Cyprus. I firmly believe that if the major global players truly need a specific outcome, well, let's take someone like Donald Trump, for example, then this entire issue will inevitably be resolved one way or another, regardless of the consent or the disagreement of the parties involved. It really just comes down to power and influence, doesn't it? If they want it done, it gets done. Just like that, tomorrow morning. It was decided in exactly the same way back when Cyprus first became an independent nation. I have talked to many Cypriots, specifically to those older Cypriots who were still just young people back in those days, and they remember it all quite clearly. And one of them told me this. He says, there was a terrorist organization, IOKA, in the southern part. They were killing Turkish Cypriots. And we also had a paramilitary organization that protected the Turks and, accordingly, carried out retaliatory strikes against the Greek Cypriots. And he says, just the evening before, he says, we had a list of people, Greek Cypriots, whom we were supposed to attack the next day. And then the very next day, we started living like brothers in one country. We were just ordered to do it, and that was it. All the plans for, liquidations for the next day ceased to exist, and nobody asked us about anything. But back then it didn't work because they didn't ask. As of today, the United Nations is doing the right thing. It is proposing certain plans, it is proposing certain compromises. In any case, this should be decided by a referendum, but without the will of the major players in this world, it still won't be resolved. And the referendum will simply be so that a new conflict doesn't start tomorrow, so that every person can speak out, let off steam, and so that everyone is sure that it is their opinion and that it was ordinary people who voted, while politicians around the world simply accepted it as a fact. Although in reality, it will be completely the opposite. But people will believe that everything is fine, so there will be peace on the island. My friends, at the same time, if you carefully read the news, either the daily news of Southern Cyprus or Northern Cyprus on this issue, you will see that the authorities of Southern Cyprus, the authorities of Northern Cyprus, and the authorities of Turkey, they are pretending, putting on a poker face, as if they absolutely do not need this solution, as if they are making a concession to the international community that is trying to reconcile them. But I believe you shouldn't look at the politicians' statements, don't let them mislead you. You need to look at their real actions. And the real actions are the already signed contracts for the export of gas that hasn't even started being extracted yet. This is the real memorandum on laying the gas pipeline. Real actions are the actually concluded contracts with those companies that will be involved in exploration, extraction, transportation, and the sale of gas. These are real actions, and they are actually happening even though in public politicians all put on a poker face and pretend that they are being persuaded to make peace and that they won't make any compromises. The third important piece of news that should not pass us by unnoticed. A proposal was submitted to Parliament, and it was submitted from Turkey to rename our country from the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus to the Turkish Republic of Cyprus. What has changed? Did you notice? One word disappeared: Northern Cyprus. Our country is currently called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and according to this proposal, it will be called the Turkish Republic of Cyprus. Why was the word northern removed? In my understanding, when we say Northern Cyprus, Southern Cyprus, we are talking about two parts of one whole. But when it is simply the Turkish Republic of Cyprus, then it is the whole itself. In other words, in my view, they are sending us a message that this will be a separate state, not part of Northern or Southern, not part of that whole, but it will be a whole in itself. Please write in the comments whether you agree with this or not. Personally, I have no other explanation. My friends, let's move on and talk about money. There is an economic crisis in the world. We can see it with our own eyes. Our wallets and bank accounts are feeling it. I've already talked about this, but my opinion is that this is not a crisis, because a crisis is something that has a beginning and an end. A crisis, then an economic upturn. We live a more prosperous life, then another crisis. We tighten our belts, we start saving, then the crisis ends and the economic upturn begins again. I have talked in previous videos about how authorities regulate this issue by changing the interest rates of their central banks. So, as of today, if I understand anything at all about economics and life in general, I believe this is not a crisis. And I believe that since it is not a crisis, it will accordingly never end. I believe this is a new reality that has not yet been fully formed. It will take years to fully form it, but this is a new reality that we will live with, and we will never return to the old world, to our old life. And you can also argue with me in the comments about how right I am. I won't dwell on this much now, but how is this crisis felt in other countries? People are starting to save money, they are turning down the heating in their homes, they are buying energy-saving light bulbs to consume less electricity, they are starting to buy fewer expensive products and travel less. Statistics show this. How is the crisis being handled in Northern Cyprus? The authorities believe that citizens should not have to economize and should live the same full, good, wealthy and prosperous life. That is why our authorities increase the mandatory minimum wage every few months. For instance, in July it was increased by 17%. Would you like your salary to just be increased by 17% every few months? Like this video if you would want that too. I have explained in previous videos that this is a path to nowhere, that it is a bad path, because in this way the authorities are fueling an inflationary spiral. That is, today prices have gone up. People tell the authorities that we no longer have enough for such a comfortable life. Instead of starting to save money or working more, getting a second job, taking on some side gigs, providing some additional services in this market and earning more, the authorities simply raise wages. Businesses are now obligated to pay not only higher wages but also taxes on those wages, contributions to the social fund, contributions to the pension fund. Consequently, each employee now costs 2.5 times more. If previously we were contributing approximately 80 British pounds sterling per month for each employee, today we are already contributing 180 British pounds sterling. This, by the way, is the amount before the wage increase. This is for those employees who receive the minimum wage. For those who earn more than the minimum, we contribute even larger amounts. Unfortunately, that is the situation. At the same time, of course, since our business expenses have increased, we cannot avoid raising prices. That is, prices have risen globally. Our authorities, so that we would feel good, have obligated us all to increase the minimum wage for our employees. Consequently, we are forced to raise prices even higher. After a while, people will realize that this didn't work, that they still don't have enough money for the comfortable, familiar lifestyle they are used to. Our restaurants are full, we have many new car dealerships. Look at the license plates of the cars. Almost all the cars driving around here are new, ones that were recently brought in and registered. People here are living as if there is no crisis. My daughter had a birthday. I had other family celebrations as well, related to my daughter graduating from school and university. In general, we went out to restaurants several times. You can't get a reservation, they are packed to the rafters. Expensive 5-star restaurants are absolutely packed with people as if the crisis doesn't exist. And they are all spending quite freely because the government is raising wages. We have chosen this path. But where does the government get the money for these wages? I talked about this in the previous video. The government borrows this money from banks and pays huge multi-million interest payments just on these loans. In other words, every month the government borrows huge sums from banks. We are talking about tens of billions in debt in the budget today just to pay people's wages, so that people feel comfortable. Why am I telling you all this again? This is a very important point. My friends, everything that is happening reminds me a lot of the plot of the play The Visit. I guarantee that even if you haven't read it, you have definitely seen either the play or a film adaptation. There are about 5 of them because it is a very famous work. The plot there is very simple. A wealthy elderly woman, a billionaire from the United States of America, arrives in her small, poor, bankrupt town in Germany. And she offers the townspeople $1 billion in exchange for killing the man who wronged her, who had betrayed her back in her youth. Naturally, the residents refuse to do it, but gradually, a very interesting thing happens in the town. The town is getting into debt at a high speed. People go to restaurants they cannot afford and dine there on credit, they buy cars, they buy real estate. The town's mayor is working on a project to build a new town hall, even though there is absolutely no money in the budget. Why are they doing all this? They are doing all this in the hope that someone will eventually agree to kill this offender and the lady will pay out that billion. This money will flow into the town's economy and one way or another will end up in the pockets of every resident and the administration of this town, which is exactly what happens in the end. The offender is killed and the check for $1 billion is written out. The deal is done. What is the analogy with Northern Cyprus? I see that the country is getting into debt. Every person is getting into debt. Many companies are getting into debt. I see this even in the Northern Cyprus real estate market. They keep building and building. Although for some developers, sales are not going very well because the location they chose was a mistake. I see that the state is getting into debt and continues to pay higher and higher wages, which is what I was just telling you about. What are the residents and authorities of Northern Cyprus hoping for? For the sale of natural gas? For the idea that this money will make us all fabulously rich? And the project is already being prepared. They have already started laying the gas pipeline, they have already signed a memorandum, and work has begun. And this means that the Cyprus issue must be resolved because you cannot sell gas from some unrecognized territory. It is impossible for the energy security of the European Union to be based on some unrecognized state with which it is not even possible to sign any serious documents. Thus, one way or another, the Cyprus issue will be resolved, whether it be the recognition of an independent state or some kind of federation or confederation or a republic within some union of states. But in any case, it will be done. This is exactly what the authorities and residents of Northern Cyprus are counting on. And we are counting on our real estate investments to also increase immediately after the country becomes recognized in one way or another. And against this backdrop, Northern Cyprus is testing a 5G system. In July, it was tested at Erkan Airport and in Nicosia, and on November 15th, this communication system is set to launch across all of Northern Cyprus because the testing was very successful. Turk Telecom is investing $100 million in fiber-optic internet infrastructure. The project is called Fiber to Home and it is scheduled to be fully completed by the year 2027. Why do we need such powerful internet in Northern Cyprus, especially two different sources of internet like 5G and fiber optics? We are already living well here in our small resort-like provincial country. And the reason is that our neighbors, South Cyprus, bet on the development of the IT sector after they stopped being an offshore zone. And indeed, many world-class IT companies have come to the southern part, to South Cyprus, and this has given South Cyprus very significant economic growth. Plus, look at the Persian Gulf countries. Well, personally, I have completely given up on them. And after some time, foreign investors, foreign companies, foreign residents, those who work there in that region, they will be leaving and they will be moving to other countries. Northern Cyprus is not the worst alternative in this sense. But in order for them to choose Northern Cyprus specifically, there needs to be infrastructure here so that their businesses and they themselves can live here comfortably. For this, in the modern world, you need the internet. If you disagree with me and think that the Persian Gulf countries will continue to prosper and nothing will ever happen to them, just look into this issue a little bit and see why they were interesting in the first place. Out there in the desert where there is nothing, who was providing them with security? And why is it that this year specifically there is no more security there and there won't be in the future? Where do food, drinking water and fresh water in general even come from in the desert? Where does the electricity come from that is needed, for example, to cool this country so that people don't die from the heat there? Look into these questions and everything will immediately become clear to you. And so one of the alternatives is our Northern Cyprus, because in today's reality, flying somewhere to Southeast Asia, flying somewhere to Bali, for example, in Indonesia, with today's fuel prices, is becoming neither cheap nor comfortable. Northern Cyprus is located right here between Europe, Asia, and Africa. If there is powerful internet infrastructure, inexpensive flights, because they aren't too long from Europe and the Middle East, that's all it takes. It's an ideal place to relocate to and live in. It just needs the infrastructure and the conditions. Give it a like if you agree. If you don't agree, let's argue with facts in the comments below the video. The next piece of news is about ambitious plans for tourism development. In 2027, it is expected that 6 million tourists will visit Northern Cyprus. For example, in 2025, because 2026 hasn't ended yet, it hasn't been calculated, well, in 2025 there were almost 2.5 million tourists, which is 17% more than in 2024. And compared to 2025, the difference to the expected figures for 2027 is 140%. And more tourists means more infrastructure for leisure, more infrastructure for living, more hotels, more earnings from property rentals, from car rentals, more real estate buyers, rising real estate prices, and higher returns on our investments. And all of this happened in just 1 month, July. When I look at this news, I don't see 7 separate news items. I see different pieces of the same puzzle. I see that our country is simultaneously solving its current issues, challenges, and problems, while at the same time preparing for a completely different future. And we at our company are already preparing for this future. Everything we earn, wherever we can borrow money, we invest in Northern Cyprus real estate, in coastal areas on the first line, things that will truly always be in demand. And we are very hopeful for the growth of these prices. And what are you doing to prepare for this future? I also promise to tell you which news I personally consider the most important. So it's not even the arrival of the United Nations Secretary-General. I consider the main news to be the pipeline, and the fact that the authorities admitted that it will be a two-way pipeline for us. What can be exported via a gas pipeline from Northern Cyprus to Turkey? Only gas, which means it will be extracted here. And Turkey has enough gas to support its infrastructure and economy. This means it will go further to the European Union. To me, this is very obvious. My friends, I am genuinely interested in your opinion on this matter. Write in the comments what you think. Will there be recognition of Northern Cyprus as a separate state? Or will it be a federation with Southern Cyprus? Or will nothing happen at all? And in 10 years, Northern Cyprus will still be an unrecognized provincial island resort state like this? Please write in the comments, let's debate this topic, and be sure to subscribe right now so that in a few years you can come back and discuss it to see who ended up being right.